This is Land of Havilah, Psalm 21. It's 13 verses. David speaks of himself in the third person in this psalm, calling himself he, him, and the king. In the first 7 verses, he speaks about his eternal salvation. Verse 1. For the chief musician, a psalm by David. The king rejoices in your strength, Yahweh. How greatly he rejoices in your salvation. You have given him his heart's desire and have not withheld the request of his lips. Selah. For you meet him with the blessings of goodness. You set a crown of fine gold on his head. He asked life of you. You gave it to him, even length of days forever and ever. His glory is great in your salvation. You lay honor and majesty on him, for you make him most blessed forever. You make him glad with joy in your presence. For the king trusts in Yahweh. Through the loving kindness of the Most High he shall not be moved. Comment in verse 1, the king rejoices in your strength, Yahweh. We rejoice to have God on our side because of his strength. He's the great power of the universe. Naturally, we want that power on our side. And he says in verse 1, how greatly he rejoices in your salvation. David knows he's saved. He's not wondering about it. He said in Psalm 23, surely I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Not, I sure hope I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In verse 2, God gave David the desire of his heart and request of his lips. And what was that desire and request? He says in verse 4, he asked life of God, meaning he asked for eternal life. And how did God respond? In verse 4, you gave it to him, even length of days forever. So by all means we should ask God for eternal life. Quote, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Joel 2:32. He doesn't just save us in verse 3, he saves us in style. He meets us with the blessings of goodness and sets a crown of gold on our head. He withholds no good thing, Psalm 84:11. Amazingly, in verse 5, God lays honor and majesty on us. We're his servants, but that's not a lowly position. To be a servant of the Most High God is a lofty position. It's such a lofty position we must fight to maintain our humility. In verse 6, the saved are most blessed forever, and he makes us glad with his presence. He's present with us. We shall not be moved because of the loving kindness of God in verse 7. Our position is secure. Now switching in the next 5 verses to the opposite situation regarding a person who sets himself against God, obviously he won't be saved. Verse 8, your hand will find out all of your enemies. Your right hand will find out those who hate you. You'll make them as a fiery furnace in the time of your anger. Yahweh will swallow them up in his wrath. The fire shall devour them. You'll destroy their descendants from the earth, their posterity from among the children of men. For they intended evil against you. They plotted evil against you which cannot succeed. For you'll make them turn their back when you aim drawn bows at their face. Comment, let's be forewarned. The Bible teaches there is a literal hell. It's a, quote, fiery furnace, end quote, in verse 9. Quoting the whole thing, you'll make them as a fiery furnace in the time of your anger. Yahweh will swallow them up in his wrath. The fire shall devour them, end quote. Since it appears in a psalm, we might dismiss it as poetic and metaphoric language, except that there's so much confirmation of a literal hell elsewhere. Jesus was very explicit that there's a literal fiery hell, Matthew 13:42, 13:50, and on in the sayings of Jesus and in the writings of the apostles in the New Testament. In Revelation 21:8, it's a lake that burns with fire and sulfur. Now the conclusion, summing up this psalm of God's salvation on the one hand and his fiery judgment on the other, verse 13, be exalted, Yahweh, in your strength, so we will sing and praise your power. Comment, Psalm 22 is next.